Good morning, everyone. We are now in the third day of Poliglotar 2021, and the first talk will be given by David Allen Martin II, and his talk will be about Translation³, a three-level translation-based methodology for faster and more enjoyable language learning. And David is from the United States, and now he lives in Germany, speaks some languages like German, Spanish, Chinese, and so on. Okay, David, please, you can start.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction, Giuliano. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with everyone. Oh, can you go ahead and activate that for me, Giuliano, please?
Okay, I did it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Beautiful. Okay, thank you so much. All right, so welcome to my presentation about Translation³, my bilingual language learning method for improved comprehension and the development of intuitive language ability. My name is David Allen Martin, as Giuliano already said. I'm from San Diego, California, and I grew up entirely monolingually, so I grew up only speaking English. I didn't actually start learning any foreign languages until I was about 12 or 13, first French and then Spanish, and I failed, so to speak, at both of them because the methods were very, very grammar-based, memorization of vocabulary lists and things like that. So I quit after 1 year in each case. And then later on, I started to study German when I was about 16, 17 in high school, of course, 1 or 2 days a week. But fortunately, I had a teacher who was very, very focused on media and especially films and television. We watched a lot of movies and TV shows in German with English subtitles. And that's how I got the idea for what I'm going to be talking about today. So just a little bit about my education background. I was so enamored with the German language after finally getting access to it, thanks to my teacher, that I went on to study Germanic linguistics at Berkeley in California, and then German studies, Romance studies, so Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, French, and Latin, as well as sinology at the University of Göttingen. And then later I did a master's in translation studies, German, English, Spanish at the University of Heidelberg. I've been working as an English and German teacher and a language learning coach for the last 15 years. And for about 10 years, I've been a professional translator and interpreter with the language combination German, English, Spanish. I do more translation than interpretation generally. And I also translate from a number of other languages into English and German, in addition to the languages listed here. And for the last couple of years, I have been focusing on a company that I founded called Linguathor. We try to provide more effective language learning for people who want to learn languages, primarily English and German for right now. Okay, so I'd like to start out with a question for everyone in attendance. Where would you say in your experience, or according maybe to statistics that you're aware of, where do non-native speakers of English generally speak the best English? This is, of course, on average, and why is that the case? So before I continue, maybe you can write it in the chat if you like. I don't know, can people write in the chat, Giuliano?
Yes, they can.
Okay, beautiful. So where do you think people speak the best English as non-native? Okay, Plinio says Sweden, then the Netherlands. Any other guesses?
I would
like
also
Plinio's the only one.
also say Nordic countries like Sweden, Netherlands. I think so.
Okay, so no more responses from the crowd, so we will see. Okay, you, Pliny and Giuliano, you were both right on the mark, right on the money. Indeed, the Scandinavian countries and the Netherlands are all at the top. And these statistics, just so you know, are from Education First, which is an international education company, originally based out of Sweden. And they collect this data from hundreds of thousands of students every year based on exams that students take. So what do these countries have in common is my next question for you. In the chat, please How do we define the best? Very good question, Marjolein. When I say the best, obviously I mean it according to these proficiency statistics. But if you speak with people from these countries, then they generally have a very, very good accent. Not just the accent, though, they generally have a very, very good feeling for what is correct in English. Marjolein says TV in English. Isabel says watching movies in English. Plinio says a lot of input on a daily basis. Where does that input come from, Plinio? Tony? As Marjolein and Isabel said, from watching movies, watching TV, interaction. Exactly, exactly. They do not have dubbed movies. Okay, great. Thank you, Carolina. Okay, so exactly. They do not dub TV series or movies. That means, just like Tony said, they get a lot of input on a daily basis. This would be this is a meme that I found on the internet. This would be watching The Godfather in the Netherlands in English. And as you can see, there are subtitles there. Kijk hoe ze mijn jongen hebben afgeslacht. So look how they murdered my son, right? So in the Netherlands, in Scandinavia, they're getting input. They're listening to English every single day, and they're understanding it because they have dubbed, they have subtitles in their language. Okay, so just so everybody is quite clear on this, Finnish is not a Germanic language, because sometimes when I talk about these statistics, people say, well, but Dutch and Danish and Swedish and Norwegian, those are all Germanic languages, very similar to English, so they have an advantage over speakers of other languages. Well, Finnish is not even an Indo-European language. It belongs to the Finno-Ugric language family, let alone a Germanic language. So yeah, you can't really make a comparison there. By the way, I've also met a lot of Estonians in my time in Estonia. They also spoke spectacular English without having more English in school, because they don't start earlier. That's another thing. Okay, so yeah, Marjolein says, yeah, most people speak English in the Netherlands, even if they haven't learned it at school. Yeah, that's a spectacular point. Okay, great. Thank you, Marjolein. Exactly. Okay, so how can we profit then? How can we benefit from this concept of listening in the foreign language and reading in the mother tongue? Because obviously it is a successful method of learning languages. Well, let me first talk about the general problem in language instruction, traditional language instruction. In Germany, for example, which is where I live and work, most schools only offer a single course, and it's essentially made for everybody. So a one-size-fits-all thing. That means that the native language of the learner is effectively irrelevant. What does that mean in a kind of concrete way? Well, when I was teaching English at the University of Göttingen, there was a German class, and they threw, for example, Dutch speakers and Spanish speakers in a German class. Well, the big problem there is that Dutch speakers obviously have a massive advantage over Spanish speakers, so that even though they're all at the same level initially, the Dutch speakers progress far more rapidly, understand far more at the beginning, and they end up kind of leaving the Spanish-speaking students in the dust, and so it causes a lot of friction in classrooms. Okay, so obviously, what is the solution? Well, teachers they do one of two things. They either only talk in German the whole time, but that's obviously also very, very nerve-wracking for beginners. Or they do offer translations, whether they offer spoken translations or written translations in the books, but they are only translated into English. So the assumption is that students speak English, but that is not always the case. I work with a lot of Spanish speakers and teach them German, and many times they don't have very good English skills, and the English translations that are provided they're simply not comprehensible to them. Okay, is everything okay so far, Giuliano? Am I speaking too fast for the translators?
I think everything is okay, but you are indeed speaking a little fast, I think.
Speaking a little fast. Okay,
I think it's no problem.
Okay, thank you very much to the translators. I'd just like to say I really appreciate your efforts, yeah? Okay, I'll slow it down a little bit. Okay, so how do we, as I said, profit? How do we benefit from the native language, the mother tongue of the students in a foreign language learning environment? Well, I have created a method, or rather kind of compiled a method that I call Translation³, as you know, and it consists of 3 levels of translation. In fact, that's why I call it Translation³. So the first level of translation is the sentence translation. The reason why I call this the first level is because this is the level that is most important for understanding the message of what it is that you're learning. So here you can see the learning language, the language that is being learned is German. And I have 2 sentences. The first one is: Mit innovativen Methoden ist Deutsch viel leichter zu lernen. So you can see the sentence translation, level 1 translation is: Alemão é muito mais fácil de aprender com métodos inovadores. Okay, and the second one, dank Translation³, oder die Übersetzung hoch 3 auf Deutsch, verstehst du alles auch ohne Wörterbücher. Graças à tradução ao cubo, você entende tudo mesmo sem dicionários. Okay, so now I understand what these sentences actually say. The second level of translation is the word translation. So the word translation actually tells me what the individual words mean. As you can see with the first sentence, the translation is: Alemão é muito mais fácil de aprender com métodos inovadores. But the German sentence starts with com and then goes on with inovadores métodos, or está. So ist in German can mean either of these 2 things in Portuguese. Alemão muito mais fácil para aprender. So you can see right away we understand the structure, the syntax of the German sentence without needing to learn any grammar rules, because we can see it in our native language. Okay, and the third level of translation is of my own invention, and I call this active reverse translation. So the idea here is that you are back translating, you're translating in reverse from your native language into the foreign language. So here you can see I just have the first couple of letters of each word in German. Initially, there were no letters there, it was just question marks, but I realized in working with lots and lots of students using this method that it helps in terms of reducing cognitive load when you add the first letter or first couple of letters of each word. Okay, I'm going to talk more about active reverse translation later on. Let's go ahead and continue on. So the idea with active reverse translation is that you're promoting word memory, you're promoting grammar in context, and obviously also promoting fluency. Like I said, I will talk about it a little bit more later. Okay, so this would be an example of Translation³ with the language combination German-Spanish. So German is the language being learned, and Spanish is the native language of the learner. And here you have an example of a massive German sentence. And anybody who has studied German will have seen sentences like this before, where you're thinking, oh my God, what does this sentence mean? It has so many components to it. So the nice thing about Translation³ is that it can make even sentences like this immediately comprehensible, because you have translations in your native language at both the sentence and the word level. Okay. Okay, so and here's just a couple of other examples of other language combinations. The one on the left-hand side would be a Polish speaker learning Swedish, for example, and the one on the right-hand side is a German speaker learning Chinese. Okay, so you can see that the method can be applied to any language combination. What does it actually look like in practice? Well, I'd like to show you how these texts are created. Translation³ is not only a method, it's also a tool that I designed and that my brothers program. Both of my brothers are software developers. And we're going to start out with a German example here. By the way, this tool is still internal for internal use. So unfortunately, it's not available to the public yet, but we hope to make it that soon. Okay, and as you can see, these are the sentences that you've already seen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a lesson from the Deutsche Welle. which has lots and lots of materials for German learners. And I'm just going to copy out this text. It's about too much English. Well, we'll see what it's about in just a second. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete the sentences that are there in the database. And then I'm going to just add a period, because otherwise it won't split the sentences properly. And then I'm going to open another window and go to the read string. And so what you will see here, I can switch back and forth in between these. What the tool has done is it has taken this text and it has automatically split it up into individual sentences. And in the case of the translations, we're pulling those using an API from various translation tools. And then at the sentence level, the translation is generally quite good. At the word level, I am the one actually creating the translations. I didn't actually do the translations for this text in advance, so you can see that some of them are quite good. In the cases where you see multiple translations, I've done those personally. In other cases, especially where it's a capital, I haven't actually done those translations myself yet. Okay, so in practice then, it would look like this. Yeah, we've taken that German text and we've turned it into a Translation³ text. If I go down further on the page, here I have my active reverse translation text automatically generated. Okay, I can do the same thing for any language combination. So I could do the same thing for English here. We'll go ahead and take an English text from, this is a C1 level, how humans evolved language. If the page will load, there we are. So go ahead and copy this out. Okay, and then is it going to open that for me? There we go. Okay, so if I copy the text in here and I remove this, there we are. Okay, and then change to the read screen. I know why I did that, because it's the wrong language combination. We want Portuguese learning German. There we go. Learning English, I mean. So at some point we'll have buttons for all of these. There we go. And that was the text that we just imported. Okay, and you can see that I've actually done some of these translations in advance. So the, for example, o or a in Portuguese. Thanks can mean obrigado, but it can also mean graças a, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we have, in this case, both the level 1 and level 2. And just as before, we can go down to active reverse translation and immediately start practicing our speaking. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue then. So where did this idea come from, and how do translations promote intuitive language ability? Well, part of the method I got from two experts on the topic of language learning. The first is Stephen Krashen, which I'm sure most of you have heard of before. Stephen Krashen obviously talks a lot about comprehensible input, so the comprehensibility of the message. The other expert who I'd like to talk about has unfortunately passed away, but she helped many, many people to learn languages in a much more brain-friendly way, as she called it. Her method was about understanding words, so understanding the implicit structure of messages. Let's go ahead and take a look at Stephen Krashen first. So Stephen Krashen, who is still alive and kicking, doing very well, is an American linguist and didactician, author of many, many articles on language acquisition, bilingual education, neurolinguistics, and he distinguishes between learning and acquisition. So learning being explicitly learning things like learning grammar rules, memorizing vocab, and things like that, as opposed to acquisition. So the kind of unconscious acquisition of especially things like pronunciation and grammar. Grammar is a big, big deal. And Stephen Krashen said that acquisition can really only take place through massive auditory input. But you can't just have massive auditory input. You can't just listen to, if you don't know any Russian, you can't just put on the Russian radio and then listen all day and expect to soak up the language. You need to understand what it is that you're listening to. It has to be comprehensible. So the second part of Stephen Gresham's, or the second hypothesis, is that grammar acquisition, not learning, but acquisition occurs through repeated exposure to authentic language, okay? So I'd like to give you an example of this, and I know that all of you are going to pass this test. Okay, so which of the following is correct? I know that you all know this song, the Queen song, we will, you. Which one of these is correct? Is it A or B? Please write it in the chat. Jennifer says B. Gabriela says B. Mr. Max says B. João says B. Okay, everybody says B. Yeah, you know that it's B, right? Okay, how did you know that it's correct? Did you learn it in school? Did they make you memorize this song in school? How did you know? If you knew that it was correct, how did you know?
I think only people who rocked know it.
True. By listening to the song. Yes, thank you, Gabriela. Exactly. You've probably heard the song 100 times, if not 1,000 times in your life. So this is grammar acquisition. You know that it's rock and not rocking. And we know from experience that English learners have difficulty sometimes between deciding, okay, should I use the infinitive or should I use the gerund, the ing form? In this case, you know it right away. You don't have to think about it, but you didn't learn it. You didn't memorize it. You just listened to it a bunch of times. Okay, so then why also translate the individual words? What advantage do we get from this? Well, as I said before, this was Vera Birkenbiel's idea initially, and this is just an example of a German expression that you might know if you're a German learner. Jetzt geht's die Wurst, and the English translation would be now it's getting down to brass tacks, which is an equivalent idiomatic expression, or now it's getting serious. Now, if you tell me that that's what this expression means, that's great. Now I know how to say, now it's getting serious, right? But I miss out on some of the learning that I could have if I understood everything. So if I provide you then with a literal translation of every word in this expression, now you know, okay, so this expression, which means now it's getting serious, actually means literally now goes it around the sausage. Okay, which is a very, very funny way of saying now it's getting serious. So by telling you what each word means, by showing you what each word means, not only am I making it easier for you to remember the expression because you have something to hold on to, but I'm also giving you extra learning opportunities because now you know how to say now. Now you know how to say it goes or goes it. You know how to say sausage, okay? So I'm providing you with more learning opportunities straight away. Okay, so as I said, the idea comes from Vera Birkenbiel, and she calls this decoding. So decoding is just this word for word translation of the foreign language, so you intuitively understand what the sentence structure looks like, right? However, what is the problem with Birkenbiel's decoding, the way that she initially described it? The problem is that learners have to prepare the translations, and especially if you are a complete beginner in a foreign language, then this process is extremely tedious and time consuming if it's not completely impossible for you, right? Because it's just not practicable. So the solution then is that a professional translator like myself prepare the translations in advance so that you as a learner can simply start learning without having to do tedious preliminary work. So this would be an example of a German sentence for a native English speaker. Angesichts der Tatsache, dass die Rohstoffvorräte auf der Erde endlich sind, müssen erneuerbare Energien stärker gefördert werden. Okay, that's a mouthful. But with this method, as you can see, right away, you understand even complex words like Rohstoffvorräte, stocks of raw materials. Okay, and German words could obviously even be broken down into further levels because sometimes they're quite long, but you can see right away you have lots and lots of opportunities for learning, okay, with no dictionary work at all. Okay, so how do you learn using the Translation³ method? Well, the way in which you learn is by repeatedly listening to the foreign language while reading the translations in your language. And as you'll see in a moment, the steps that I use or that I use with my students, this generally leads to 100% listening comprehension, if not somewhere between 95 and 100% listening comprehension after relatively few listens, okay? And the goal, this is very important, the goal is always that you no longer need the translations when you're done with the training session. So we only use the translations as a crutch in order to help us to understand, and after that, we don't need them any longer for the comprehension process, okay? I'm gonna hold off on the questions that you guys are asking until the end, okay? So just bear with me, yeah? Okay, so what steps do we use for improving our listening comprehension initially? Okay, the very first step, and it may sound weird, is you only read in your language. Now, a lot of people say, well, but what if I want to test my comprehension? Well, it depends on your goal. If you only want to test your comprehension, you can skip step one, but most people want to improve their comprehension and improve their speaking. And if you're really focused on improving your speaking, it makes more sense to read in your native language first, because you're priming your brain at a lexical level in order to learn new words. So we only read in our native language first, and then we only listen in the L2. Now you'd say, well, I just read in my native language, so now I understand everything in the L2. That's not the case. You won't understand everything, depending on your level, obviously, and the material that you've chosen. And especially, you won't be able to hear every single word, but by the end, you will be able to, okay? So the third step then, after listening without reading anything, is reading the L1 and the L2 together. At this stage, we don't listen at all because listening would be distracting. And what we really want to do is we want to internalize, you might say, the meaning of the meanings of the L2 words and sentences, okay? But without the distraction and the speed of the foreign language audio. Then we would listen and read simultaneously. And because we've already read without listening, it's easier to listen and read at the same time because we know what's coming. Finally, we listen and we only listen again. And now we can make a comparison between our comprehension at the beginning in step 2 and our comprehension at the end. And all of my students invariably say, yeah, by the time I get to the end of these steps, I understand everything, even if I understood nothing at the beginning. Yeah, it doesn't mean you hear every single word. It doesn't mean you understand every single detail, but you do understand globally everything that you're hearing. Okay, and once you, well, if you find in step 5 that you have not understood at the level that you'd like to, you can always repeat step 4 and then repeat step 5 again. Okay, so you always have that option. And some of my students will do that. It depends on the length of the material that you're working with. Okay, the final step is engaging in art. And this is really nice because it allows us to start speaking right away. And the reason why I came up with art, I showed this to you before, the reason why I came up with art was because I wanted a way to practice new language that I've learned in a guided context, in a controlled context, where I can be the judge of the correctness of what I'm saying. I can correct my own grammar, especially, without having to have a tandem partner or having to have a teacher to correct me, okay? And that's the idea here. In a controlled environment where it's clear how many words there are, it's clear what the syntax is in terms of word order, all I need to do is remember the words, okay? So the idea here, as I said before, is that you are reproducing these sentences from memory using the cues, using the words, the L1 words from the level 2 translations. So I would look at com in Portuguese, and I remember mit. Inovador or inovadores, innovativen, métodos, Methoden, and so on and so forth. I practice this until I can say the whole sentence fluently from memory. If I don't remember something, then I can simply, I'll go here. If I don't remember something, then I can simply look down. That's the reason why the L2 sentence is still there. But when I'm doing this exercise, I'm focusing on the cues. I'm focusing on the art part of the boxes and not on the L2 sentence. But I want it to be right there because I don't want to have to look somewhere else in order to correct myself. So this self-correction process, this self-monitoring process is very, very important. And if you do this until you can say the sentences fluently, then you'll find that you really, really improve your fluency and that you really, really improve your feeling for the grammar because you have to remember the endings of the words in each case. Okay, so it's very, very important to stress here that your memory of the words when you're doing art should not come from memorizing them as if you were memorizing a vocabulary list. Your word memory should come from having listened to the audio text, using the steps that I already described until you can effortlessly understand the audio, okay? This is very, very important. And that way you can benefit from the principle that we saw earlier where we will rock you, you just know what's correct because you've heard it often enough before. If you find the exercise too difficult, if the cognitive load is too high, it means you haven't listened often enough. So just listen again and give it another try, okay? Okay, so just a couple more things, and then I'm gonna obviously answer all your questions. So a lot of people say, well, children don't get translations when they're learning their native language, so why do adults need them? Well, adults can learn much faster than children can. I've worked with both adults and children, and I've seen this process. Children usually, people say, well, but they sound so much better. Yes, but they also spend more time with languages generally, whereas adults generally spend less time, unless you're from the Netherlands or from a Scandinavian country, okay? So what adults have, the advantage that adults have is that they already have a very, very large vocabulary in their native language. You already know tens of thousands of words, and you have a vast amount of knowledge about how the world works. All you need to do is learn how to say all of those things that you already know how to say in your native language in the foreign language. And because this is the case, it's very, very taxing, it's very irritating when you're trying to explain something to somebody with hands mit Händen und Füßen, as you say in German, with hands and feet, if you could just, or when you could just translate it for them in their language. The problem, of course, is that you need to be able to do that, right? You need a teacher who speaks your language, or you need a translator who creates these kinds of texts for you. So in my experience, working with hundreds and hundreds of students, using multi-level translation, as I've shown you, that is relevant and interesting to adults, leads to immediate learning success. And the beautiful thing about the method is that even complete beginners can jump straight into intermediate and advanced material, okay? So that means that when engaging in Translation³, the way I see it is you're learning in the foreign language, you're immersed in the foreign language thanks to the translations on multiple levels, and it's immediately applicable because you can immediately see an increase in your real world listening comprehension and your ability to actually speak the sentences. This is in contrast to grammar-based methods, which are based on the learning of explicit knowledge, memorizing grammar rules and cramming vocab lists and things like that, which most of the time are not directly applicable in the real world. And even if they are, you have to think far too much about them for them to be very useful in a conversational context. Okay? Okay, so on a final note, I'd just like to say that I have an academy where we use these texts, as I've showed you. We use this method. It's called the Linguathor T3 Academy. It is primarily dedicated to Spanish speakers who would like to improve their German. But if we see that there is enough interest from speakers of other languages learning German or learning English or learning really any language at all, then obviously we will expand into other language combinations. So within the Academy, you can find lots of different topics, lots of different tips on how you can improve your listening and speaking, and obviously lots of materials. I also post things about different websites that you can use the method with, and we've just launched a conversation course, which obviously uses this method in combination with Anki, which I've been using for about 15 years, and I teach people how to use Anki to even step it up to the next level and improve the rate at which they can learn vocabulary, especially, and not just learn it, but retain it in the long term. Okay, great. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you so much to Giuliano for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And thank you very, very much to the translators, to the interpreters for bearing with me. I apologize if I spoke a bit fast. Yeah?
That was great, David. Thank you so much. We have a comment from Marjolein from the Netherlands. So
Yes.
cool. Can't wait for it to be available for the public. So the first question is, when are you going to launch this app?
That's a very, very good question. Currently, well, let's just say that expanding from having a functioning tool to being able to accommodate hundreds, if not thousands, tens of thousands of users is not an easy step. So we are working on it, but it is currently that side of the business is currently a side project. And that's only because we just haven't gotten enough resonance from learners. So if we can get enough people interested, then I'm sure that we could kind of expedite the process, but I can't say for sure. Hopefully it's a matter of months, but we'll have to see.
You could stop sharing your screen so that you can.
Yes, of course.
So
yeah.
a question from we have here a question from Francesco. What about particular grammatical elements that don't really translate into another language? As an example, I'm thinking of pronouns like ci, ne in Italian, or i, un in French, to Spanish or English. How is it possible to contextualize those?
That is possible, because if it weren't possible, then your teacher wouldn't be able to explain it to you either, and your book wouldn't be able to explain it to you. So in those cases, rather than a translation, sometimes there will actually be an explanation. So the method allows for explanation. Yeah, it allows you to insert, or me as the translator and language learning coach, to insert these translations so that they are comprehensible. But if they're not, you can always talk to your coach. You can always talk to your teacher. Yeah.
Okay, Suzanne is asking, is this method used to get to a B2, C1 level, or is it more for beginners, low intermediate levels?
Well, those are essentially. Do you mean, Suzanne? Do you mean going from B2 to C1, or do you mean reaching that?
Reaching, I think.
Reaching that level. Obviously, the method is most powerful for beginners and lower intermediate learners, but it's also very, very useful for advanced learners, because the Maßstab, I'm thinking in German here, the rule, or rather the goal, is to reproduce native speaker sentences, right? Using active reverse translation, using A.R.T. So even if you're an advanced speaker, you can kind of skip the listening steps if you already understand, and jump straight to the active reverse translation and really, really see an improvement in your speaking and your intuitive grammar understanding. So I would say it's for all levels. It just, your focus is going to be different.
I have a question. You mentioned that a professional translator or teacher would prepare the material in advance, and then the student would be able to use these sentences. And also you have mentioned that you have this prepared for Spanish, German, and you are thinking about including other languages, but then you would need to prepare the material. So this method needs to be used with a teacher and student, or could it be used by someone alone?
It could theoretically be used by someone alone, absolutely. The problem, however, when you're doing it yourself, is if you're a beginning learner, then you have to look up the meanings of all the words. And that's why in the courses that I offer, when I work with my students, either on a one-on-one basis or if they're in the academy, all of the courses that we offer the materials already prepared in advance. So the student can just jump straight in. This can absolutely be applied on your own. In fact, I've had some students who created their own kind of tool, and obviously it's not as fast, and they had to do a lot more manually, but they prefer to do it themselves, and that's perfectly fine. It can be applied by any learner, but it's just far more time consuming.
So the buyers of your app, when it will be available, will be mostly teachers or people in general.
No, because the translations, I am working on creating translations for various language combinations. Let's take Portuguese, German, for example. The more I work on that particular language combination, the more I create, as we call them, a curated vocab for each language. So at some point, the learner doesn't have to do any translations anymore because I've already professionally prepared all of the translations. So the app will absolutely not only be for teachers, it'll be for anybody who wants to use it. And then maybe for teachers, we will provide special access so that teachers can put in their own explanations for their students if they like.
Oh, that's great. We have a question from Paulo. Are you focusing on most frequently used words of a language?
I personally, as a language learner, do focus on most frequent words as part of my initial language learning process. So when I start learning a new language, I'll use authentic materials using my method, but I'll also, to a certain extent, use materials. I'll especially use sentences where each successive sentence has starting with the most frequent words in the language, has the next most frequent words. So I definitely do focus on word frequency as a learner, and I encourage my students to focus on word frequency because you just get more bang for your buck initially.
And another question about the launch of your app. Is it going to be online? You have to use a browser, or will there be an Android and iOS version?
Obviously, we will do our best to create an Android and iOS version, but initially it will be a web app. But as I said, in the meantime, if people are interested, so speakers of a certain language who are learning a certain language, you're more than welcome to contact me. Let me know what your language combination is. And if we get enough people interested coming from, for example, Portuguese, learning English, then we will create an entire section of our academy dedicated to Portuguese speakers learning English, and obviously create courses and materials until
yeah, how many people do you need?
this.
How many interested people do you need to make that course for that language pair?
I would say that we would need at least 50 people being interested.
50?
In order, 50 to 100 people being interested in order for it to make sense, because it obviously is it's a great deal of work, as you know. As you know, these translations don't grow on trees.
Yeah, of course. In the beginning, you have to work a lot, but then if you find enough students, and how much will it cost? Do you know?
Well, we would the app itself we would make very affordable. That I couldn't say for sure. But the app itself, I imagine, would be very affordable. And then we would obviously offer courses to kind of go along with the app. Yeah, don't worry. We have no intentions of making the app incredibly expensive.
So let's see if someone else has questions. We have almost 30 people here. It's a lot of people. You can use your microphones, people, or write in the chat box. Also, you can speak in Portuguese or Spanish or German. No problem. If you want to ask questions in those languages.
Yeah, please.
Hello, Robson, are you there? I don't know if Robson has a comment on it. Actually, he is right here in my house because we are coordinating the rooms from here.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, tell him I said hi. I don't know if he's
Yeah, he arrived
listening
here a
in.
little late.
I see.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm here. So can you
Hey,
all hear me?
Robson.
Yes, we
Hey
can hear
there.
you.
All right, guys. I'm on I'm on a cell phone and the computer like at the same time.
I see. No worries. No worries. So no questions, no
No.
other
And
questions
I have
from.
some other questions regarding. Okay,
Please.
please go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Adriana, please. I don't know who was asking a question. You can ask, please. Adriana, tá no mudo. You are muted. I don't know. Okay, so my question is, how many people do you have so far with the app you have or with the teachers you have? How many people know about Translation³?
Primarily my students. So we've only just recently launched the academy. There's still relatively few people, but I work with hundreds of students on a one-on-one basis, and so hundreds of people are aware of the method, and I use it with them on a regular basis. But it's only as of recently that I've kind of started to talk more about it in social media, and we're kind of getting closer to being able to provide a tool to the greater public. Paolo says, would you open opportunities for volunteer translators to great? Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the dream. I would love for that to be, because I can't do everything myself. And I used to work as a translator trainer. So I worked with a lot of kind of junior translators, and I love the work. Just translation in general is one of my absolute passions. So I would love to be able to open up that opportunity, Paolo, to other people. Yes.
Another question from Suzanne. Can we apply this method using language learning with Netflix? Has any of your students tried it?
Absolutely. Well, language learning with Netflix allows you to have a level 1 translation, what I call level 1 translation, right? You have the translation of the sentences in your native language. What you could do is if you can export those. I'm not sure if language learning with Netflix allows you to export the bilingual subtitles, and then you could add your own level 2 translations at the word level, so the decoding. And then you could theoretically also do active reverse translation. So to answer your second question, yes, my students love language learning with Netflix, and it's a great tool. And it's also they've rebranded. It's called something else now. Does anyone know off the top of their head? Anyway, on the new website, if you look up language learning with Netflix, you'll find the new website. They have, for each language, lots and lots of different content. One of the great things about the new website is it's just a great place to find content on YouTube, on Netflix with subtitles. They tell you, to what extent a certain context source actually has subtitles or not.
Do you know okay, please go ahead.
Suzanne?
I think you can, well, at least when I tried it, you could like drag the mouse and see the word for word translation. I tried to use it for Arabic, but because the spoken language is so different from the written language, it's been super complicated, but I think you can kind of reproduce something like that, although it might not be human translations.
It's most likely not human translations, and B, unfortunately, like you said, you have to kind of click on every single word, so it makes it very, very tedious, and that's exactly what I wanted to avoid. But absolutely, thank you for your question, because it is a great resource nonetheless. Absolutely, yeah. But not having human created translations makes it less than optimal. Thank you so much, Susanna.
Okay, David, I think I have a question if we have like time, Juliano. Yeah, we have
Yes,
time,
of
right?
course,
Because
we
the
have
next
time.
lecture is only
Go ahead.
starting at 10. Okay, David, I think your method is really interesting. I use a lot of translation for language learning, even though some people like condemn, right? Because the idea is that you have to like think like in the target language. But I think this is really hard when you are like at a very low level, especially when you are studying like in non-related languages. And my question for you now is, how well does your method work for like unrelated languages to, you know, like Anglo-Saxon and Neo-Latin languages, such as like Arabic, as Susanna just put, or even like Mandarin or Japanese or Korean, because of like the word order kind of thing?
Great question. It works just as well for any unrelated languages as it does for related languages. The only difference, and we talked about this when we did the Meet the Speaker, you and I briefly spoke about this, that obviously the farther a language away is from your native language, the longer it takes for you to internalize not just vocabulary and pronunciation, but obviously grammar. So even though it is much, these languages like Chinese, for example, are much, very different to English, especially in terms of grammar, the fact that you have the level 1 and level 2 translations makes it so that it's immediately accessible to you. And then if you combine it, obviously, with active reverse translation, you can turn right around and speak and think, because that's what you said was your kind of focus. The method allows you to think right away because you can see the meanings of the words. The problem when you don't have translation is most of the time you don't see the meanings of the words. So the teacher doesn't necessarily, your teacher won't necessarily translate every word for you, and your books, the books that you find in traditional language classrooms, most certainly don't translate every word for you. So it's very difficult to think in the language because all you have is the vocab list. So I think that, in fact, one of my main focus areas with Translation Cubed is to allow you to think in the target language from the very first day.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because like I think Mandarin must be a very difficult language to think in, right? Especially when you are like lower levels. Yeah, I can only speak for Japanese, and I tell you that it's really, really hard, especially because of expressions you can't translate. Like onomatopoeia, for example, there's I think over 1,000 onomatopoeia in Japanese. I mean, if you want to sound like convincing enough, convincing enough, so you have to learn, I don't know how many, but at least like hundreds of onomatopoeia, which are usually not translated, especially like a movie subtitles. They do not always translate onomatopoeia. For instance. I was just wondering, how would your app cope with, you know, this not usually translated terms or metaphors, or, you know, texts which are like difficult to translate? I don't know.
I think that your example of Japanese is a perfect one, because Japanese is a spectacular example of grammar that is completely intransparent to a beginner. So, you know, you take a sentence like "Anata wa Nihongo ga wakarimasu ka?" So, do you speak Japanese? So, anata is of you, anata wa subject marker particle, Nihongo ga object marker particle, wakarimasu ka sentence or interrogative particle, right? So because these particles come up over and over with the, especially level 2 translation, the word translation in Translation Cubed, you can see those right away, and it becomes immediately obvious. And I think that this, as I said, this kind of visual combined with the audio makes it so that your brain very, very quickly starts to internalize those things. Chinese, you're absolutely right, is complicated, but it's still subject, verb, object, SVO word order, whereas Japanese is not. And I think especially for very foreign, in that sense, languages like that, it's incredibly useful, incredibly helpful.
That's great.
Thank you for your question, Robson. Thank you.
David, we see other initiatives using translation as well. For example, the YouTube channel Easy Languages. Do you know it? It has easy German, easy Polish, easy Spanish.
I do,
and
yes.
They make 10-minute interviews with people on the streets, and they put the subtitles in that language and below in English. So we have both languages in the same. We could do something like you are saying, using translation. And I also saw like Luca Lampariello, the polyglot, also talking about translation to learn languages.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are some attempts to use translation to learn languages, but the problem is that it's just kind of there, and there's no real specific method. And when you use the 3-level translation and Translation³ in combination with my very specific steps, and you do that every single time that you study, then every single time that you study, you have immediate and visible, tangible results. And I think that's the number one reason why I created the method, and I call it a method, is it's not just, hey, I use translation, but rather use translation in this specific way, and you absolutely will make progress.
Okay, thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
Now we are in the end of our session. And that was great to have you at Poliglotar.
Thank you very much, Julian. I appreciate it. And thank you once again to everyone in attendance. Thank you, Robson, and thank you very, very much to the interpreters, as I said. Thanks, Mario-Elaine. All right,
Bye.
take care, everybody.
See you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Okay, take care. All right. Ciao.
Ciao.